And the comments that I have echo Dr. Cesaria's comments as well. When academics talk about religious freedom, we talk about these two different elements of it, that it has to do with global government restrictions on religious freedom, as well as societal hostilities towards religious freedom. And so governments restrict religious freedom by favoring particular religious groups, and also by perhaps passing specific laws that are targeted towards restricting the freedoms of particular groups. But that also interplays with social hostilities towards religious minorities or towards religious groups. And so you see that in, hostilities like attacks on Jewish synagogues, or Muslim women having their headscarves ripped off while they're on public transportation and things like that. So when those social hostilities are happening, it actually feeds into more government restrictions. And when the government codifies restrictions on religion by passing laws saying that it's okay to limit the freedoms of these particular groups, that actually leads to an increase in social hostility. So these two things form a negative cycle with one another and reinforce one another. And in fact, when academics measure these two things, and we have a number of different ways that we measure these, over the last 10 years, what we see is that almost every single indicator we have of religious freedom, of government restrictions, and of social hostilities are increasing. So religious freedom is heading in the wrong direction globally right now, and that can be really discouraging. And when we look at data that maps these two things, we see countries where these things are happening together. There are a few outliers, but mostly we see that countries that have high social restriction, high social hostilities also have high governmental restrictions, and that these two things work together. And what happens when you have crises or emergencies or, pandemics, is that oftentimes religious minority groups, as well as ethnic or racial minority groups, tend to get the blame for those things. And we've seen this happen over and over again throughout history. And so, for instance, in Egypt, when they're having, political and economic turmoil, you see Coptic Christians who get targeted and are repressed, and their religious freedoms are restricted. You see Uyghurs in China when China feels that their political power might be threatened. You see this time and time again, and you see it happening with COVID-19 right now. And so in Saudi Arabia, Shia Muslims are a minority, and you see them being blamed for outbreaks of coronavirus. In India, they had a hashtag that was trending called Corona Jihad, where Muslims were being blamed in India for spreading coronavirus. In poor countries where there might be limited resources for helping people who are infected with the virus, sometimes those resources are being given to people who are part of the majority religious faith, and people who are part of minority traditions are not being able to access those resources. And you see that happening with Hindus and Christians in Pakistan right now. So this is my research on religion and framing shows that when there's a crisis opportunity, a lot of times those religious minority groups will be framed as the ones who are to blame for the crisis, and governments and individuals will take advantage of that as an opportunity to blame ethnic and religious minorities. And we see that happening right now, and so we need to be aware of that, and we need to be vigilant about that. The good news is that there's a way to interrupt this negative cycle that we know about, where religious restrictions by the government and social hostilities mutually reinforce and feed one another, that we can interrupt that cycle by having positive social interactions among religious groups and across those faith lines. So when people of different religious backgrounds have positive social interactions with one another, that stops social hostilities from happening. when they live in neighborhoods with people from different faiths, when they work together, when they play soccer together and have those positive social interactions. That makes people less likely to accept government restrictions and more likely to say that they want religious freedom in their country, and less likely to have those social hostilities. We can interrupt that negative cycle and instead have a positive cycle of reinforcing positive social interactions and more religious freedom in the country. And so I'm hopeful that we can do that in the future and reject the negative cycle that might come when these crises arise. Thank you.